Chapter 5, in a way, is the parallel story of Chapter 4. It's about how groups change, but it focuses on norms, social norms. And standards or rules for behavior have been of great interest to all of us in our research, but one of the things that has been more studied is people conforming to norms, the story of how norms lead to, a norm, for example, that we should cross the street when the traffic light is green leads to people crossing when it's green. But what has been less told are the stories of norm change. And this chapter walks us through all the early research on how groups form and group socialization, and also talks about that process of contestation. And I guess I find that really exciting. It also talks about diverse forms of norms, including, the injunctive or moral norm, what should be done, versus the behavioral norm, the descriptive norm. And it talks about norms for stigma management in this chapter as well, which I find really interesting. It talks about how people approach the challenge of norm change from a position of more or less power. And I draw on that stigma work by Goffman, or we draw on it in this chapter, to really try to unpack the idea that there's no one trajectory of change. So oftentimes people, especially historians, will emphasize the particular specific context of change, whereas psychologists will talk about universal processes of change. But actually, every context is unique, and actually every context has these common processes. So we really try to unpack that in this chapter. I love the complexity of them. What about you, Cecile? How do you react to this chapter?
Yeah, I think this is very important point, because what we actually want about systemic change is more or less is kind of takes at the level of norms. So we might the way we make a text is by normalize what previously considered as non-normal or non-normalized, what previously denormalized, what previously considered as normal. And we can make reflection from so many events in history about how something changed, how in the past, maybe people always perceive that their race is more superior compared to others, and then after the experience, long life experience, making contact with other groups, and then they live differently. So it's like the kind of change, and might facilitate what we call as the system change. This book, it's very important part of the book, I think.
Yeah. It's also, I forgot to say, but it's the last chapter that stays firmly in grips with the previous literature. The remaining 7 chapters in the book are way more wild riffing. So that's another aspect of it that's appealing, right? Is it connects in with what we've learned in undergrad. What was your reaction, Chiara, to the book, to chapter 5, I mean?
Yeah, look, I love norms.
So
it's always fun for me, but I really like the idea of, it being a good thing for the group sometimes to dissent or rebel against the norms when you're seeing those, particularly if there are norms that's seemingly conflicting between the stated values of the group. So your injunctive versus the behavior you're witnessing, and challenging that is actually a really great show of group loyalty. It shows you care about the group, and I think that's a really valuable thing to kind of bring front and center, is the idea that if you're in a group, it doesn't mean you have to conform to every aspect of the group, because we need those people who kind of take a step back and look at things and may dissent, and that leads to evolution. It leads to change over time, and without people going, oh, actually we don't think this is right. And instead of just you can have the thing where the group just breaks up, which that's that adjournment process. But you could also have that beautiful progression or change, and the group becomes better for it if people are willing to listen.
Yeah, so cool.